Are you working on your author career but struggling to get that first book published? Does the goal of being an author seem too lofty? Or thoughts of having multiple books and making a full-time living are as fantastical as living in Cinderella's castle? Welcome to Discovered Wordsmiths, a podcast where aspiring authors can be heard. Join Stephen Schneider as he finds and talks to authors you may not know, but authors that have gotten their foot on the author career path. Hear what they've done to get there and where they want to go now. Settle back. It's time for a bit of inspiration and advice. Come listen to today's Discovered Wordsmith.
Hey, welcome to another episode of Discovered Wordsmith. This is episode 10. I'm so glad you've come to this one. Today's talk is with Antoine Bandele, and it's a great talk. He has some great stories out there, and he's really an inspiration. He's been doing this on YouTube for a while. He kind of got out on his own big because of Star Wars, and now he's transitioned into doing author work and writing, but he also has a webpage where he has posters and t-shirts, and he bases his books on his family's ancestry and African history, and it's a really great talk with him. He's really exciting to listen to. If you would like to check out his books, you can find him at AntoineBandele.com. Please take a moment, listen to this, check him out. And here's Antoine.
Antoine, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking some time to talk to me today. I really loved your cover of your book. I haven't gotten it yet to read, but I've just had to find out a little bit more about you and talk to you. So before we delve into the writing and publishing, tell me a bit about who you are, your background, and some of the things you do besides writing.
How far back do you want to go? Are you going like high school back? Are we going like a year back, 5 years back?
Whatever you think is relevant. That's fine. I mean, you don't look very young, or you don't look very old in your pictures, so I imagine it shouldn't take too long.
Yeah. Well, so I'll maybe go like 6 years back, and the reason for that is because that's when I first went self-employed. So I used to work for Apple retail. So I was one of those guys who you would come in and ask questions about your new phone or why, the battery is dying, and us having to say like, oh, because, this and that. And then it later coming out that like, yeah, we actually do, hurt your batteries intentionally for like the technology part of it.
Right.
So I left there in 2015, and the reason for that and the catalyst for that was Star Wars. So that's just the basis of it. But the real reason for it was because I've had a YouTube channel since 2007, like almost like when YouTube came out. But I was at that point putting like short films and skits and like geek reviews on there, but not necessarily much else. But then Star Wars came back, and I was like, kind of like, oh yeah, I was into Star Wars in high school. Let me like get back into it. And I was doing this thing called the Versus series, where I put two fictional characters together, and then that started expanding out. And with the popularity of Star Wars, my channel kind of like, went with it. And I was like, hey, I don't need to be here anymore at Apple. So let me just do this YouTube thing. And so I did that, and I started doing freelance work for other YouTube channels like editing and graphics and stuff like that. Expanded out to like Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is now my biggest thing right now. And that taught me like over the past up until 2017 when I started publishing, taught me how to work for myself and just, how to be my own entrepreneur. And in that, I think I was watching Game of Thrones at the time because I was part of one of my channel things, and I was like, I was wondering if there's like an African Game of Thrones, or like just what African fantasy is out there. And, I end up researching and finding out authors like Nnedi Okorafor and N.K. Jemisin. And then, of course, recently Tomi Adeyemi, who published the same year that I did. And I just was like, oh, yeah, I would like to see a fantasy that I would like to see with African people in the forefront, and specifically African people who aren't depicted post-colonial, but pre-colonial, because I feel like we've seen a lot of the post-colonial storyline. I think at that time, 12 Years a Slave had come out, and everybody was just lauding it. And I was like, this is another slave movie. I don't need to see another slave movie. I'd rather see us just having fun doing magic and being cool, not necessarily being oppressed or being victims. I'm tired of that narrative.
Right.
So then I went with that while engaging with the indie community. I think the first podcast I listened to was, I think they were called the Self-Publishing Podcast at the time. It's the one with, the guys, the three guys.
Johnny.
Johnny Truant and
Dave
Sean Platt and Dave. All of them. They were my first, and then I got Joanne and Pan shortly after, and then Mark Dawson, and now I'm listening to the Career Author and a bunch of like Hobo Writing Life and the Writing Excuses, the Brandon Sanderson. So I'm like in all of that now, and that is what got me to even consider, I can do this on my own, kind of a thing, in the same way I did YouTube on my own and didn't work for a corporation.
Right. Well, that is a heck of a lot to unpack there. You said
there was a lot.
20 things. Yeah. I find that exciting. I'm older than you, so I actually got to live through the original Star Wars. So I'll tout that a little bit. How's that? Now, did you know though that the Clone Wars cartoon, the guy that mostly did that, produced it or whatever, was Dave Filoni? He started with Airbender, the cartoon.
Yeah, he actually started with King of the Hill and then moved on to Airbender and then got Clone Wars. It was really dope. Yeah.
Did you watch the behind the scenes for Mandalorian with him?
No, I didn't. And the reason so another thing right now, as I'm kind of on a Star Wars hiatus right now, because I feel a little bit mistreated. Not with Mandalorian. I actually do like Mandalorian. But I do think that it is overhyped because what came before it was not what everyone's cup of tea or everyone could agree on. It's still very good. I think it's definitely the best thing Star Wars has come out since like 2015. I just don't think it's like incredible. So my friend actually told me about the behind the scenes feature you're talking about right now, and like the technology they use for, like, they use a set but not a set, the same thing they use on Oblivion, the Tom Cruise movie.
Yeah. It was pretty fun. And I agree with you. There's been some missteps, let's say, but that's something we should call the Star Wars podcast to discuss. I'm sure we could.
I know, right? Exactly.
So the other thing I find interesting is you just have jumped right into doing YouTube, jumped right into all these opportunities available online and done these things. And I'll ask you a bit about your website in a moment. You don't just write books. You've got shirts and you've got some audio, you've got all sorts of things. So tell me a little bit about your thinking with that. You obviously might be a modern Renaissance man. Your generation definitely has all these things available that you can do, and you definitely seem to be embracing it and keeping your own thoughts, doing what you want to do. Is that something you wanted to do in high school, or has you kind of grown into it as time has gone by?
I think it's something that at least my instructors and teachers had told me that I probably would end up doing, because I remember after high school, I went to this program called Inner City Filmmakers, because at that time I was like, oh, this filmmaking stuff is cool. During that program, the main instructor, the owner, creator, I guess you would call, of the program, she was like, hey, man, you would make a really good producer. And that sounds so boring to a 19-year-old, like wannabe director, writer kind of a thing. It's like, a producer? Like, you mean just like get everybody corralled and, make things happen? And it was like, that sounded ridiculous. But now, like 10 years later, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm totally a producer, because I'm not just a writer, but I am basically an indie publisher. I published 4 other authors under my imprint. Like you mentioned, I do produce audiobooks on my own in-house. And yeah, just like, I'm very good at coordinating all that kind of stuff, and just was very resistant to it, in my 20s.
Okay. So you had all these things you could do, and you seem to be involved a lot with film. What made you want to write a book and publish a book?
Well, that was actually my first creative endeavor. Like, when I was younger, my mom had us write books all the time, and like children's books with kind of like a quasi comic book kind of a thing. You have your pictures and then you have the words next to them. And then sometimes we would get them laminated, which I thought was really cool. We go to Smart and Final and laminate it, and it looks super like, like real or whatever. And then I was writing, like in elementary and middle school, and got praised for that. But I was like, okay, cool. And then that same program, the Inner City Filmmakers program, I won their screenwriting award that summer, and still was like, whatever. University, went to writing classes and had my instructors go like, man, you should be writing. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know about that. Like, I'd rather direct. I'd rather do everything else besides that. But then with the whole wanting to find a fantasy that I wanted to read, instead of waiting for it, I just wrote it myself. And that was the catalyst for it. It was just like, you could do it yourself these days.
Yeah. And I don't think you're the first person that said, yeah, there's nothing out there I want to read, so I better write it.
Right.
So tell us a bit about your books, because I'm looking at the website right now, and I must say you have some amazing art. Did you do the art too?
No, I am
okay.
I do have artistic ability, but I'm very limited in like the poses and the kinds of facial expressions I can do. So I definitely hire out for that. But I think it helps. I think it helps when you're creative to have a lot of creative talents, because then you can communicate with whoever you're working with
right.
very clearly. So the fact that I have a slight artist background, I can speak to them pretty easily, or the fact that I edit my audiobooks, if I'm ever working with another engineer, we speak the same language, that sort of a thing. But yeah, everything I almost everything else is commissioned except for my audiobooks, which are all in-house.
Okay. So tell us a bit about the books, the stories you want to get out. You mentioned a bit about African-American, you mentioned a bit about pre-colonial days. And I'm looking at the one, the Kishi. Did I pronounce that right? Kishi?
I could be wrong, because I have never had an Angola person actually speak to me and tell me, although I had a woman and she would have probably told me if I was saying it wrong, but I've been saying Kishi and she didn't correct me. So I'm going to assume that it's correct.
Okay. But I'm looking at that cover, and they always say make a cover that tells what it's about and attracts people. And that is a really great cover. I love the other ones too, but that one really stands out to me. So tell us a bit about the books, the stories, what you were trying to get out when you wrote those.
So initially, I think from 2016 to 2017, I just read up on African history, African folklore, mythology. And in doing that, my brother, who's a huge fan of Dungeons and Dragons, was like, oh, hey, there's this African mythology that shows up in my books all the time. It's called a Kishi. It's like this guy, like a charmer, who has like a handsome face on the front, but then he hides a hyena on the back of his head and he charms women and then he eats them. Or if he likes them enough, he impregnates them with demon children who eat their way out of their mom's womb. I was like, whoa, this exists? And there's absolutely, and I researched it. I was like, oh, wait, let me see. Maybe there's a book about it. So I was like, looking at the Kishi books, nothing. Him telling me that premise and just their abilities. I'm like, there's a story in that already. It tells itself, you know what I mean? How does it not exist already? So yeah, I took that and started researching even more specifically, because at first in that year, I was just doing general African continent knowledge. And that's a huge scope. People don't realize how huge Africa is sometimes. And then I started narrowing down to Angola and the Kimbundu people who believe in the Kishi mythology. And yeah, just went in on that and just loved that it was a mythology that isn't highlighted much, and something that just was so well suited to a story.
I think it looks great, and I love what you just said about it. That's a great elevator pitch to tell people. That's a story you said it's not out there. So I got to ask, with everything going on in our country right now, do you think your books, with you being African American and your books about the culture, the history, do you think that's something that maybe more people should see, that there is? I'm not saying there's no racism. I'm not saying there's no, differences in how people get things. But do you think you saying, hey, I'm African American, I've been able to do this, look at what I've got, and it's part of my culture and history. Do you think that's an important thing to get out there nowadays, or have you been trying to hide a little bit?
No, definitely never hide it. And the whole reason I wanted to do this was to normalize Black fantasy, not necessarily, I guess, be revolutionary or anything. It's just that we and the thing is that we've been out here already. All these fantasy novels that I started researching about, they were just there. You just have to dig deep to find them. It's just that we haven't had the platform quite yet. So that's why I love things like we did 2-3 weeks back when we had the Blackout Tuesday, and then we had from up to Juneteenth, and I think it started in like mid-June or something like that. Buy 2 books from Black authors just to try them out, kind of a thing. Like campaigns like that are so great because it shows there's been a lot of it already out there. It's just that the platform for it. But I think it's doing well right now, because if you think about Black Panther that just came out, that was huge.
Yeah.
And then Tomi Adeyemi's Children of Blood and Bone just got picked up, or not just got, like 2 years ago was picked up by Lucasfilm. They're making a movie of it. Nnedi Okofor's Who Fears Death and Binti are going to be on HBO and TNT respectively. N.K. Jemisin, I think, has her 5th season, being optioned. There's so much. It's happening right now. Like, it's happening right now.
Yes, and I'm excited about that because, okay, let me ask you this. And again, I'm not trying to get political and racist, but the Black Panther movie, it wasn't the first Black superhero. It wasn't the first big name one, but it was the first one in the Marvel MCU. Do you feel that it represented African-American people well, or that showed them like they should, or maybe not?
That was the reason why I loved it, actually. And the reason I think that one's is different from the previous ones that came out is because it was unapologetically and specifically Black and specifically African. Rather, yeah, we had Blade, we had some things like Blank Man and Meteor Man, which most people don't even know about, but those were my favorite superhero movies growing up as a child.
I'm going to have to look those up.
Oh, yeah. Meteor Man in particular is one I like, but Blank Man's kind of a comedic take on like Batman, which is really funny.
Okay.
But those existed, but none of them were really, really integrated with African culture and African lore. And what Killmonger represented, I liked a bit because there is sometimes a cultural clash, and people don't realize this when they kind of see Black as like a blanket, but then there are subsets of like, an African American is going to be different from a West Indies, Caribbean African, mm-hmm. or someone who is from the actual motherland. We are different people, and it's not a monolith. And I like that notion was brought up of the differences between the two, and the idea that if there was an African nation that had like the best technology in the world, not doing anything for its people, and there's an African American child who had to grow up in the shit and then be like, whoa, you guys are eating and I'm not eating, like, I don't like that. And him being misguided because he has no leadership, he has no tie to his past. That hit me really hard. And I know for a lot of people, they're like, oh, they might critique the movie about like, oh, the CGI was bad, or like, something like that. And I'm like, that kind of thing doesn't, and I'll openly admit that I'm extremely biased because of the color of my skin, because of how I grew up, is a large reason why I adore that movie.
Well, I know, looking at, again, I haven't read your books yet, but just looking at the covers and what you described of it, it sounds very different. And I'm like, man, that sounds like something I really want to read. It's funny. I was just watching another video talking about tropes in fantasy, and they named all these tropes. It's like, yeah, Lord of the Rings and Sanderson stuff and Wheel of Time and Harry Potter. They all have all these tropes, and agents are bored with it. Agents don't want to see it anymore. Everybody's read it. They all know it. It's kind of a joke. And looking at going, yeah, every single one of these is like white characters with white writers. And no wonder it turns out the same. It's so boring. And that's one of the great things of our country is we have all this culture. We have all these different peoples from different lands come together, but we still have the same boring stories coming out. So I find it exciting. When I ran into your books, I saw them on Readsy. I was like, The Sea in the Sky is the one I saw. And I'm like, that looks like a cool book just looking at the cover. And that's why I searched you out. So for me, I think it's cool and exciting to be able to see these stories that, who wants another Harry Potter? Who wants another Lord of the Rings? We've got enough of those. Do you think that that's one of the things keeping you going right now? And do you think your future books are going to go along the same lines, keeping that definite cultural focus, or might you veer off of that a little bit?
No, definitely. Bandele Books as my imprint is a Pan-African brand, so that's not going away. I don't think ever. But also, it has more meaning than that too, because my last name isn't actually my birth name. I was born Antoine Bailey, But then my dad did research about like where that name came from, and he assumed, which is funny, it's not actually true. He assumed that it was a slave name because Bailey is a Irish name. But then doing the ancestry stuff, I realized that that came in through marriage, and it was the French and German that had brought over our ancestors to the States. But anyway, the reason why he wanted to change our names because he wanted to have something that was from where we came from, West Africa, specifically Nigeria, and then more specific to that, the Yoruba people. So my last name is Bandele, which we thought meant born away from home, and that's the reason why he chose it, because he's like, oh, that's significant. We were born away from home. That's going to be our last name. But it's actually a mistranslation of the Yoruba term, which is actually Bamidele, which means follow me home. So that's kind of like my mantra for my brand is like, hey guys, return home with me, and let's like, have some stories, that take place in the motherland or influenced and inspired by the motherland.
It's kind of a double meaning for you.
Right. It has a double meaning for sure. And both work.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. So tell me a little bit about your other books and what future book plans you might have.
So, I mean, well, we touched on it a little bit. So my first one was the Kishi, which is like a kind of a darker fantasy and mythology type thing. The By Sea and Sky, which you mentioned, is a pirate fantasy. So that one's based on that, and there's some airships in there too, which are pretty cool. But I'm right now, literally, actually, right after we get off this call, I'm going to continue writing it. I'm on like 3 chapters until I'm completed on my first young adult book, which is actually funny that you mentioned Harry Potter. Part of its target is Harry Potter, but mostly Percy Jackson fans, because are you familiar with Percy Jackson? And like,
yeah. I love Rorden.
Yeah. Oh, and he's doing great too. I don't know if you know his imprint that he has, where he is representing other cultures. So like right now he has Tristan Strong punches a hole through the sky, which is like an African American folklore tale with like Brer Rabbit and John Henry, and then he's had some stuff with some Hindi stuff and a Chinese tale, and he's doing some fantastic stuff. I haven't
heard of that. That sounds pretty cool too.
Yeah, so it's like similar to Percy Jackson in the sense that it's about an American kid who realizes he's a descendant of Greek gods, and Poseidon, I believe, was his father in that one. Oh my God, that's like a spoiler, but I think we're okay, right? That's like a 20-year-old book or something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of doing that with my own. It's called T.J. Young and the Orishas, and the Orishas are the way I explain it best to people who are familiar, with the Euro mythology. Is it's like Greek and Roman mythology, and that there's a pantheon of gods that these West Africans believed in, and still believe to. Some people still believe in it today. And I'm having my African American kid learning about it, and then going to like a magic camp and discovering all of that. And it's pretty cool. Like I'm literally almost done with it. I'm like 3 chapters away.
That sounds cool. I notice they all seem to be within the same world or universe, and it says, see if I'm pronouncing this, an Esawan story.
Esawan.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is my adult series, and that it's about adult characters, not because it's adult content necessarily. But yeah, that is a shared universe. So, for instance, By Sea and Sky, the Sky Pirate tale, and the Kishi, the dark fantasy, those take place in the same world, though in separate regions. So I'm building out the world bit by bit. Kind of like, okay, so like with Game of Thrones, Game of Thrones starts after Rob's rebellion. I'm basically writing about Rob's rebellion first, and then eventually getting into like the big saga, huge book, epic fantasy stuff later.
Okay. So you definitely seem to keep having plans, and you've got more and more coming out. I think that's very cool. Do you have plans of doing anything with these? Maybe a cartoon, maybe a video, or movie or something like that?
The Kishi's first chapter already has been adapted as a comic book, which is called The Man with No Name, and I really like that. That was a fun one to do. And then but in terms of adapting to like animation or anything else, like that takes a little bit longer. But while I do like being indie for something like that, I would actually try and get a literary agent for that in terms of but I have to wait because I personally I don't have a actual completed series yet. I don't have a completed trilogy. Getting there soon. Once I do that, then I would want to pitch out to a literary agent, and then they can figure out where the best home for it would be.
Right. And honestly, just looking at your stuff, talking to you, I don't doubt that that's in the future. Okay, so what are you doing right now to market these books? And I know, like I said, you've got a lot on your website. You've got a lot of things going on. So what are just some of the things you're doing to get your name out?
Right now, I'm using, the typical indie AMS, Amazon ads and Facebook ads and BookBub, and I actually do follow Mark Dawson, and I have his course, his self-publishing formula course, in which I do all those steps. But then also I've expanded out to, as you saw with Reezy, I was on Ready Discovery. Hidden Gems has a ARC, the advanced reader copy program so I'm always looking for other ways to market besides just the typical ads. So yeah, I've been doing that. I even for By Sea and Sky hired a marketing consultant just so I can make sure they had the right footing, and it's working because look, you discover me and a whole bunch of other people are finding the book and stuff. So
right, so that's definitely good. How has Reedsy done for you using the discovery? Because I know a lot of people are questioning it. It's still kind of new. Has it done well for you?
I mean, time will tell, I guess, how effective, but so far I've had not seen anything negative about it. I mean, it's helped me so far, but again, like you said, it's in its infancy. We don't really know what its true potential is or where it might stagnate. But so far I've had no issue.
Okay. So let me ask, other than your website, I'm assuming Amazon, is there anywhere else you can get your book, or are you doing, I know maybe not, but are you doing any appearances anywhere?
Oh yeah, no.
Coming up?
Right. That was my goal this year too. I had 2020 goals video that I had on my YouTube channel, and the ending of it was supposed to be, and then guys, I'm gonna go to LA Comic-Con and sell my books. And that's the reason why I actually made the comic book. I specifically designed that comic book because I was like, oh, if I'm gonna be at a comic convention, might be a good idea to have a comic book. So it's so I had that comic book as a lost leader, and people can see that, and then at the end of it I have a call to action to be like, hey, this is a book series if you want to complete the rest of the story. But yeah, no, I don't have anything, but my books are completely wide, so that's audiobook and print. The only thing that is exclusive is ebooks, because I'm in Kindle Unlimited, which is like Netflix for books. But other than that, it's everywhere. If you want it on Apple Books for audio, Kobo, Google Play, Audible, it's all there. Print, it's in Barnes and Nobles. It's in some indie stores, like I know Onyx Bookstore has it, and this other one in Georgia, which their name is escaping me right now, but it's out there. It's definitely out there.
Nice. Okay, so before we go, do you have any advice for other new authors or people struggling to get into this market?
I always first give them the links to the people that I followed when I first started. So that would be like the self-publishing podcast, the Mark Dawsons, Jenna Moresi, who is a YouTuber. She's a really good one too. She's probably really good. If you like someone who is very casual about how they explain things and not being super official or whatever, she's really cool for that. Joanna Penn is a huge recommendation, especially if you're trying to go indie. Those podcasts is what I usually push people to when they're starting. Okay,
great. Well, Antoine, tell us how to spell your name so that people can find your website.
For sure. It is Antoine, spelled the original French spelling. So it's Antoine. If you're in France, you might hear Antoine because that's their accent and that's how they do it. But in America, we have a harsher A. So it's Antoine, and my last name is Bandele.com. So AntoineBandele.com.
That's great. I love it. All right, Antoine, it was really great talking to you. I'm glad you had the time to do this. And I look forward to possibly talking to you again in the future as you get more things out and see where you go with it.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you for listening to Discovered Wordsmiths. Come back next week and listen to another author discuss the road they've traveled, and maybe, sometime in the near future, it might be you.